welcome to Gamecock Pod Live.
For the next 3 to 4 years, I'll be committed to the University of...
This is Rodgers again to the 25, 20, 15, 10. Rodgers scores!
Jackie Bradley Jr. delivered for the Gamecocks.
Lost it up, looking for Kelly. Touchdown! Can you believe it?
And South Carolina is sending shockwaves through the SEC.
Frederick lays it in at the buzzer. That's a win! Unbelievable! I don't believe it!
And now, live from Studio 54 of the Gamecock Pod Studios, here's the Cockfather himself, Keith Alsep.
All right, everybody, welcome in to Gamecock Pod Live for March the 22nd, episode number 1183 of Gamecock Pod Daily and Gamecock Pod Live. I am your host, Keith Alsep. We've got a jam-packed show for you today. We're back and better than ever. We took off last week for spring break. But in just a couple of minutes, we will be joined by my good friend, Jamie Bradford, formerly of JB and Goldwater, now the co-host of the Inside the Gamecocks, the show, along with JC and Phil. And then at the bottom of the hour, we will be joined by Emily Adams, definitely the best-looking guest on this show, to talk some Gamecock football, and we will talk Gamecock women's basketball NCAA tournament. 2 number 1 seeds are out. The madness is at an all-time level in women's college basketball. So first, I got to give my guy Shane over in Franklin a big shout out. He's originally from Lamar, played with John Abraham there, like me, a small town South Carolina guy who moved to Texas, has a customer in my area, and we hooked up and had lunch yesterday. And just what a great time, 2 small town South Carolina guys in Austin, Texas, talking about the Gamecocks, chopping it up, having a great time. Told me some stories that made me smile, some that made me laugh, and one that broke my heart. But man, what a great connection, long-time listener of the podcast, and could not have had a better time. And so, Shane, thanks for the invite. Thanks for stopping by and spending some time with me yesterday. All right, let's get to the headlines of today. We'll start with Dawn Staley, who was named the U.S. Basketball Writers Association National Coach of the Year for the 2nd year in a row, and winner of this award 3 of the last 4 years. Dawn Staley, also a finalist for the Naismith National Coach of the Year. The Gamecocks are a perfect 34-0. They lead the nation in opponents' points per game, only giving up 50.6 points per game. They are number 1 in the nation in opponents' field goal percentage. Their opponents are only shooting a paltry 31% from the field. Offensively, the Gamecocks are 6th nationally in scoring at 81 points per game and 11th in field goal percentage. If you can believe that, as bad as they shoot layups at times, 47%. And no surprise, they are also the top shot blocking team in the country, averaging 9.1 blocks per game. There was a block party in Columbia for sure in the first 2 rounds of the NCAA tournament. Aaliyah Boston is one of 4 finalists for the Naismith National Player of the Year. She's the only player to win Naismith National Player of the Year and National Defensive Player of the Year in the same year in women's basketball. So this would be a repeat for her. Of course, really, it's a 2-person race. It's going to be Aaliyah Boston or it's going to be Caitlin Clark. The other 2 finalists, Elizabeth Kitley from Virginia Tech and Maddie Segrist from Villanova, who punched their ticket to the Sweet 16, I think, on Monday. Yeah, they beat Florida Gulf Coast, who upset Washington State in the first round. All right, Shane Beamer last night tweeted out another welcome home. Same picture as last time. I think because, quite frankly, there's probably some similarities in these last 2 welcome homes. Obviously, we will wait on the prospects to announce. I do know that both Josiah Thompson, Blake Franks, 2 offensive linemen from the state of South Carolina, both visited recently. Both have gotten recent crystal ball picks to South Carolina, as well as speedy Burlington Cummings High School wide receiver Jonathan Paylor, a guy that is a major priority in this class for Justin Stepp. I don't think we'll have to wait very long, and I expect the welcome homes to continue throughout the spring. South Carolina, I think, is really shaping up to have probably a top, at least a legitimate chance at a top 10 class. All right, former Gamecock linebacker and current Gamecock analyst Shaq Wilson, congrats to you, my man. He was hired by the New York Football Jets, 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 to become their assistant defensive line coach, following in the footsteps of South Carolina's defensive ends coach, Sterling Lucas, who was a college linebacker, started coaching in college, then went to the NFL and became an assistant defensive line coach. I think one day I would love for Shaq Wilson to coach for the Gamecocks. I think he would be a great, great recruiter. And man, I am so happy for him. What a fantastic young man he is. All right, defensive players met with the media today. That just wrapped up. When Emily joins the show, we will get her take on that. Gamecock baseball, they dropped a 6-2 decision last night to Charlotte, but they are off to a hot start. They were 20-1. They had an 11-game win streak that was snapped, but the Gamecocks are coming off of that sweep over Georgia this past weekend. The Gamecocks will host number 22 Missouri. The Tigers just swept the Tennessee Volunteers this past weekend. And so we'll see what happens there. So I guess as we wait for JB to join us, there he is. Right on time. Let's bring in the man himself, Jamie Bradford. Here we go.
What's up, man?
Hey, JB, how are you, brother?
Oh, we're living the dream around here. How are you?
Hey, I couldn't be doing better. Took last week off for spring break, but back and better than ever, and appreciate you joining the show. And so, Gamecock baseball had a little hiccup last night. They get their 11-game win streak snapped by Charlotte, but we didn't get to talk about it on Monday because I know you had Derek Scott on. But Gamecocks kind of played some weaker competition in the non-con schedule. Then they took 2 out of 3 from Clemson, bouncing back after dropping the first game of that series. You still didn't kind of know what to expect going into SEC play, but then I think for the first time since 2010, Gamecocks sweep Georgia in Athens and win their first SEC game, I think, for the first time since 2017. But what a power display. And it started with kind of a nail biter in that first game. Gamecocks, Will Sanders was pitching great, just cruising along, had a 3-1 lead. And then, JB, do you think he just kind of ran out of gas, and maybe since he is Will Sanders, they just left him out there a little bit too long as he continues to ramp up?
Well, it's interesting because, if you go back to the year 2000 when Kip Baltnight went 17-1 and won the Golden Spikes Award. And if you go back and look at a lot of his lines that year, you saw a lot of 6 innings, 7 innings pitch. Back then you would go a little bit longer than a lot of these guys do now because so many of the bullpen roles are defined, but you'd see 6 innings, 7 innings, 3 runs given up on 7 hits, 3 runs given up on 6 hits, 2 runs on 5 hits, 4 runs on 8 hits, whatever it was. And those were considered quality starts. It gave his guys a chance to win the game. And you fast forward now to where we are, and it's not just Will Sanders. I'm going to answer your question. It's not just Will Sanders, but you're seeing it all over the place. Because guys are throwing 95 to 100. Those guys back then, Kip was 88 to 91, and that was throwing hard. The guys that I grew up with, if they were low 90s, that was throwing hard. Well, everybody's doing that now. So, so numbers have changed, and what a quality start has changed. But also when guys who pitch for a long time in their careers and make an early impact like Will Sanders. And then you come into the season, you got all these first round draft pick projections on you and things like that. And you go out there and you give up 3 or 4 runs. It's easier to scrutinize. I don't think they really left him in too long. I just think he made 2 bad pitches in the game of everything that he threw. But in the SEC, 1 bad pitch can get you beat, and we all know that. So I'm not concerned about him. It'd be nice to see him. He hasn't had that whoa performance yet this year, right? I mean, that moment where he walks off the field after 6 or 7 innings or maybe more, and he's thrown 100 pitches and 70 of them or more were for strikes, and he's got 11 Ks, and it just looked easy and flawless in the whole 9 yards. He hasn't had that. I think he will have that. Hopefully he has it in a big moment. Maybe it starts on Friday. But I think Carolina should still feel pretty good about where they are with Will Sanders. The other good thing is that if they need to, if they feel like they're in a game, let's say on Friday night when Missouri comes to town and they're like, man, we're just not going to be able to scrape a bunch against these guys, and Will gives up a couple of runs and they feel like they need to hold him at bay, they have now the option to be able to go to a guy like James Hicks, who, although he closed last weekend, he can basically come in and you can almost, they're not going to do it this way, but it would technically be like a predetermined split. So they've got some great options, and luckily they're deep enough to give him a little leniency to get him where he needs to go. But my gut tells me by the end of the season, we're going to be looking at a bunch of performances from Will Sanders going, dude, this cat, he figured it out, and yeah, he is a first rounder.
Yeah, I mean, I hope we start seeing it against Missouri and then Mississippi State and then LSU. I mean, these next 3 series, I think, I can't remember if it was you or Phil or somebody asked me what I expected of this team going into SEC play, and I didn't really know what to say. And I said I wanted to see the first 3 or 4 series to kind of get a gauge. And so I don't want to overreact, but I mean, at Athens, this series reminded me of the one when Mike Morgan was calling games and your guy Smoke and Reese Havens and Darnell and those guys were just bombs away in Athens. I mean, the names changed to Ethan Petrie and Gavin Cassis and, Talmadge Lee Croy and Wimmer. The names have changed, but this is the first time I can remember since back then. It just seems like the Gamecocks just absolutely had a power surge in Athens, and the ball was flying out of the yard. And, you got to mention that big pinch hit by Michael Braswell off the bench against his home state school. And then the huge defensive play he made in the bottom of the ninth when he gets a ball, on the hot corner. He fields it cleanly, holds the runner at second, and then throws the guy out at first. What a big inning for him. And how do you think that could maybe springboard him to where he starts getting his number called again? Because that was timely hitting and timely fielding for sure.
Yeah, that was huge for him, Keith, and it was great to see. We had Wingo on our show yesterday, and he kind of, I think, maybe spilled the beans a little bit before Kingston was able to get the lineup out, but he had mentioned that Braswell would be in it last night, and he had a tough night last night. Baseball it's a harsh game. 0 for 2, struck out, but that's not really what was glaring. Unfortunately, what started the tough turn of events for Carolina was that error that he made when he airmailed it over to Cassis, and then they score a couple runs, and then bang, the 3-run homer off of Jerzenbeck. With that said, though, I mean, credit to John Whittle, because he's been reporting this for a little while now, that the last few weeks have been, or the last couple weeks at least, for Michael Braswell have been better, and he's used the word engaged, where it seems like he's maybe kind of refocused himself on being the best that he can be. This team needs him. There's no doubt. You got to have a guy like Michael Braswell. He's really talented. There's a reason why so many people recruited him. Was he beaten out this year? You could argue that, certainly, because he hasn't played much and the other guys have. But they need him. And I think regardless of what happened last night in a strange weeknight game, which everybody across the country has lost those this year. That's baseball, not making excuses. It's just happened. What happened last week in Athens, I do think that will have a big impact on him, because where he gets his name called down the line is not it's not about the fact will he or won't he. He will. But it's going to be where, and is that he gets another start, or that they need him to come off the bench again, or whatever it may be. One of the things that made Coach Tanner so great was he was able to identify roles for guys. And if you were a starter, you were a starter. But if you were a reliever, if you were a big bat off the bench, if you were a late inning guy, whatever it was, you understood your role playing for Coach Tanner, and you accepted it. And if you didn't accept it, you just probably weren't going to be around very long, because everybody knew that they had a role and they had to do that role the best that they possibly could. And that's what made his team so great year in and year out. I mean, guys like Robbie Grindstaff and John Willard, and these are names that people probably haven't heard of in a long time. But when John Willard came in the game, he knew what his job was. It was to hit a ball over the wall, and if not, hit it off the wall. And so, it's not that easy, but he certainly, he owned that. So I don't know what Braswell's role is going to be. I'm not Coach Kingston or anybody on that staff, but what I do hope is that he owns it. And if he does, that's going to make them that much better.
I mean, no doubt about it. So, hey, we knew kind of going into this season, Braylon Wimmer was going to be the guy. He won the shortstop job that Braswell had last year. We knew what he could do at the plate. But Ethan Petrie, Gavin Cassis, I mean, yeah, they were hitting some bombs against, quite frankly, some weaker competition, but they haven't slowed down. That did not stop against Clemson, and it certainly did not stop against Georgia. I mean, just talk about those guys, Cole Messina, Talmadge LeCroy, and this offense, and just how it has been completely different through, at least 22 games now as compared to the last few years when, there just wasn't a whole lot of runs, quite frankly.
Yeah, I know, man. First of all, Petrie is, it's hard to explain a freshman who's done what he's done. I've at least been saying this since day one. Okay, at some point in time, he's going to hit the skids and he is. That is still going to happen. I predicted it would have happened much sooner than now. It hasn't. He didn't have a great night last night, but nobody did. And so my big thing with Petrie is watching him. Okay, well, how's he gonna respond, both physically and mentally? How's he gonna work himself through that? Coach Lee and Coach King and Scotty and those guys when they work with him, what will it be that helps get a young kid who's hit the skids as a freshman through it, because he's obviously showed what he's capable of doing. But what I found is he's got some professional hitter in him, and he adjusts from game to game. He adjusts from at bat to at bat, and then he adjusts within the at bat. And you just can't ask for much more than that, So whenever he does start to struggle a little bit, whenever that is, and hopefully it's never, but it's baseball, so he will at some point. It'll really be more from a mental side of getting him through it. Physically, he knows how to do it. He's proven that. But I think overall with this offense, there's a collection of things that always need to be in the conversation as to the why, at least thus far. Number one, they do have better players. There are better players in this offense. Number two, they have older players in this offense. I know we just mentioned Petrie, and he's a young guy. He is. But Messina is now a sophomore. LeCroy is now a sophomore. Will McGill has transferred in from Southern Miss. He's done this before. Gavin Cassis, not an everyday guy at Vanderbilt, but he is an SEC guy, and he's been around a while. Braylon Wimmer speaks for himself. Caleb Denny has struggled. That's not going to be the case all year. Don't look at his batting average. He is much better than that. I have thought since the first time I saw him up there, Keith, for the Penn series, when I saw it with my own two eyes, I was watching him take BP, and I looked at Wingo. I said, Scotty, kid's a professional hitter. He goes, he is. So he's going to be fine. But another kid, has been around, played at Oral Roberts. So you got older guys, you got talented guys, and you got healthy guys. And I think that's how Monty would want it said. I mean, there's no doubt that he's made an impact. They've changed their approach. Strikeouts are kind of coming with their approach, walks, HBPs, power, don't get cheated in your hacks and things like that. And so there's no doubt that Coach Kingston and Coach Lee and all those guys collectively have helped this group get better. But also you got to tip your cap to the players, and you put all this into one jar, and you're going to get a better offense. Now, could we have seen it being better? What it is? I don't know. I'm not sure of anybody that predicted that. But it's contagious sometimes when you swing it well, and for the large majority of the season, they've been doing that.
Yeah, no doubt. So the same people that predicted Fairleigh Dickinson and Furman to win their first round games right in March Madness. So Marnie Lee, you mentioned him obviously taking over for a guy that I had a lot of respect for, Chad Kaye. Mm-hmm. Is it kind of a nuanced difference? Is it a kind of continuation of the same approach, or is it a different approach? And how much does Monty Lee's experience being at South Carolina and in the SEC and in the state and as a head coach helped this offense and this baseball program?
Well, I'm glad you said what you said, because I didn't know Chad Kaye. I don't remember meeting him at all. But as far as knowing somebody, I did not know him. But I knew a lot about him just based on the guys that were around him. You know, the dude that hired him, Coach Kingston, Scott Wingo, and then Monty, you know, has said it publicly, and I think we've even talked about this privately. You know, Chad Kaye is a really good coach, and quite frankly, if he was still here this year, this team would be better offensively as well. So, and that's not to take away anything from Coach Lee or anybody on the staff, but so you know, that gets lost in a lot of this, Keith. And I'm glad you said it. He's got a great track record, and maybe he'll get back in the game someday. Hopefully, we'll see him again somewhere. You know, so with Monty, you know, I don't want to speak out of turn because I'm not in there every day. I mean, I know a lot of his philosophies. I've known him a long time. You know, one of the things he often says is don't get cheated. If you're going to swing it, swing it. You know, they do work on understanding the strike zone, which makes it much more difficult when you have an umpire who doesn't know how to call the strike zone. That can happen from time to time. You're sitting here going, what? What's important in that is we have to remember these are kids. They need to understand something. You might understand the strike zone, but every call isn't going to go your way. So when it doesn't, you got to move on. You cannot overwhelm yourself with what just happened there. You're an umpire, Keith. You know what I'm talking about. But, you know, the things that I can speak on with Monty are just things that are just known, widespread and collectively in this state. He has relationships with everybody. He's honest. He understands the South Carolina baseball program from his time coaching with Coach Tanner, but he also understands it because he grew up in Lugoff, and he played at the College of Charleston. He played against Carolina. He hit 3 home runs in one game up there. They lost. The Cougars did, playing for Coach Sibiteri, but he has long understood this program as well as any in the state, and he knows what type of kids that it takes to get there. A lot of the kids that won the first World Series were Monty Lee guys. You know, he's the one that started recruiting a lot of those guys. But he also understands how to recruit this state, which I think is something that we've struggled with for the last few years, which is that can't happen with Carolina baseball. You know, they've long pretty much got anybody they wanted within our borders, and that's changed. But you know, these kids want to play for him because they understand that the things that he teaches are things that make them a better player. And he really relates well to guys, and it's neat to hear him teach things like broad focus and fine focus and all these things that it takes to be a good, complete hitter. So there's a lot to unpack with him and his impact on the program. But at the end of the day, he's a guy that the guys trust. And if you grew up in South Carolina and you're playing at South Carolina now, you've long known who he is, and you're probably – well, not probably. I know that those guys are just honored to walk out there every day and get coached by him.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that's honestly the highest praise you can give a guy, quite frankly. So let's switch to the pitching staff. Obviously, we talked about Will Sanders, Jack Mahoney coming back from injury, Noah Hall on the weekend. Those guys have been dominant. Mm-hmm. Just your thoughts on those guys and what they have done in their weekend starts.
Well, they're healthy, starting with Jack Mahoney. You know, again, that goes back to last year. You've got him healthy. He's 3-0 through 5 starts, and his ERA is 2.6, and he's throwing it well. And as the weather warms up, you feel like these guys, as long as they stay healthy, will only get better. And big time hats off to Billy Anderson and Coach Kingston and Justin Parker for really managing this staff, because God knows they don't want to go through what they went through last year again. They've been doing everything in their power for months on end to make sure that they could stay healthy. So, you know, it starts with those guys. And then, you know, I personally think that the MVP of the pitching staff so far is James Hicks. He's just, man, he's awesome. I mentioned to Drew Meyer yesterday, Keith, that I'm not comparing them side by side because they're different eras, and this isn't going to happen like it used to happen. But Scott Barber used to close games on Friday and turn around and start on Sunday.
Yeah,
at South Carolina.
One of the killer bees.
That's right. And that staff was damn good. I mean, Kip won the Golden Spikes. Peter Bauer won, I think, 12 games in 2000. And I think Scott Barber won 9, but also had like 13 saves or something ridiculous. But my point is, he was a guy who you trusted in multiple roles. And that's kind of where James Hicks is. God forbid they felt like they needed to make a move on the weekends. He's probably number one who's sliding into that starting role.
Yeah.
At the same time, Keith, I mean, if you go out this Friday night and you're in a 1-run ball game with Missouri late, he's probably also the guy you're going to there. We mentioned this earlier, if Sanders or it doesn't matter who it is, any of their starters this weekend have to come out somewhere in the middle innings, and you feel like, okay, we need to steady the ship and ride at home, and he's available, guess what? He's coming in there. So I just feel like he's been kind of the MVP. I love how he carries himself. College baseball has become very emotional. Some of it I like, some of it I can't stand. Some of it is what it is. This guy, he walks up on the mound, he pitches, he walks off the mound. And I really love seeing that.
Yeah, I mean, that was honestly the next name I was going to bring up because of just, he's kind of a Swiss Army knife kind of guy for this pitching staff. He can shine in any role, whether it's a starter, a late inning guy, a closer, or if he has to come in after 3 innings and go the distance, he can do it. But what about Chris Veach and some of the big moments he's had, and Eli Jones and Jerzenbeck and Becker? I mean, those guys have done a lot of good things for this pitching staff.
Yeah, they do. Or they have. So last night, although the scoreboard certainly was not what everybody wanted it to be at the end of it, that is teaching. We've all coached, Keith, or not all, but a lot of us have coached. That's teaching moment 101 right there. Coach Kingston hit the nail on the head afterwards. Couldn't have said it any better. If you were watching the game, you probably thought it like many people did. It kind of went off the rails a little bit for Eli. He didn't get a couple of close calls that he probably should have gotten. Braswell airmails the throw, and he just didn't handle it well. It was a sign of immaturity on the mound. I'm not saying that personally at all. I'm saying that just as a player, if you've played any sport, you've had these moments. And as it was pointed out to me this morning by another pitching coach in college baseball, we were texting actually about that performance. He said that was probably the first time he's ever actually really struggled like that, where you didn't get a call, you had an error, you were frustrated, and the guy hits the ball out of the yard, and he's just freaked out. He's freaking out. He doesn't know what to do. So I'd really be curious to hear the conversations either during or post game last night with Coach Parker and if Coach Kingston had some of those with him as well. What they'll be like this week to get him ready. They're going to have to get him back in there, so he's going to have to pitch this weekend somewhere. So that's a great learning moment for him. As far as those other guys, man, I mean, yeah, Matthew Becker, Eli Jones. I mean, they have good stuff. And Chris Veach, who's got a couple of saves. I asked Kingston, was it not last week, but the week before, I said, is Veach your closer? He goes, no, not necessarily. So that's a pretty good sign because he's put him out there to close twice, and he did it. And, but Hicks can close. And I think once Becker and Sanders, it seems to me, are kind of in very similar spots where they're, I think Becker's walked like 8 guys this year in 10 innings. Sanders has only walked, I think, 6 or 7, if I remember correctly, in 28 innings. But so like with Sanders, he's not walking a ton of guys, but he's just not locating his strikes very well. Like they're either kind of fat and they're getting hit, or they're balls. So he's not walking a lot of guys, but Becker is kind of nibbled and been around it. And so like once those guys get sharp, their stuff is so good that you're like, wow, okay, that you could easily go Sanders and then go to the lefty Becker and have a shutout. I mean, they're that good. So it's just cleaning some things up, and you just hope at some point in time that that they have the performance that they need that'll carry them through. And it's coming. It's coming. They're so good. These guys have been singing their praises for so long. That's not hogwash. I mean, there's a reason why they've been saying what they've been saying. They just need to have that moment where the light comes on, and then they'll kick it into gear.
All right, JB, great stuff. Huge series coming up against Missouri this weekend. They are fresh off a sweep over Tennessee, who has kind of scuttled a little bit, which I don't mind. Maybe my next guest might mind it a little bit, but I don't mind. So, hey, thanks for being with us. Great stuff as always. And if I don't see you before, I'll see you on Monday on Inside the Gamecocks, the show.
You got it, man. Appreciate you having me on, and certainly enjoy it. Great stuff. We'll see you soon.
All right, thanks. All right, that is Jamie Bradford. Coming up next, Emily Adams right after this message.
If you enjoy listening and watching the Free Wednesday show, now live streaming on YouTube, and would love more Gamecock Pod daily, join our growing Gamecock family by becoming a monthly or annual subscriber. You'll be able to listen to the show every day of the week and listen to guests like J.C. Sherbert, Hale McGranahan, and John Whittle from thebigspur.com, Colin Taylor and Mike Uva from Gamecock Central, Emily Adams from the Greenville News, Ben Portnoy, Michael Lanana, and Jeremiah Holloway from GoGamecocks.com, Michael W. Bratton, the host of That SEC podcast, and many, many more. As a VIP subscriber, you can join or listen to the weekly live Zoom call with up to 100 of your favorite Gamecocks and friends. After the show is an unrecorded overtime segment where the real scoop gets dropped and discussed. It's like going down to your local pub or sports bar and having a conversation with your Gamecock friends about last week's football game, men's and women's basketball games, and Gamecock baseball. And of course, there's always recruiting to discuss. In addition to the weekly Zoom call, VIP subscribers get the most popular podcast, The Morning After, which is released every Sunday morning during football season, and more VIP perks are in the works. Follow Keith on Twitter @KAllset, or follow the show on Twitter @GamecockPod. Go to the top of the homepage and follow the link. If all else fails, go to patreon.com/GamecockPodDaily. Join now and get up to 3 months free off an annual VIP subscription. You will love it, guaranteed. Now, back to Gamecock Pod Live.
All right, let's welcome in our next guest, fresh off a media gaggle with some defensive players, Emily Adams. Emily, hello. How are you?
Doing good. Yeah, it's been busy to say the least, but it's been fun, so can't complain.
Yeah, so we'll definitely get to March Madness in a few minutes, but I did want to start with some football stuff because on Monday you got to meet with several offensive players. Yesterday, Shane Beamer held court for his normal 30-minute Tuesday session, and now today several defensive players. And so of all the guys you've listened to and talked to, what's kind of been some of the biggest takeaways thus far?
Yeah, it's been interesting just because the team is kind of in an odd spot coming into this year where it's either very veteran or very new at kind of every spot. You know, you bring back Juice, you bring back Spencer, you know, that so much of the wide receiver room is veteran guys. The offensive skill players are kind of that core, but then you look at so many other spots. I mean, so much of the O-line, the whole tight end room is new. And then defensively, obviously, a lot of turnover in the secondary, still a lot of questions at edge. So it's interesting where they're sort of having to toe that line of being both a very experienced and a very young team at the same time. But it seems like the vibes are good inside the building. Haven't heard anything but good things about Dow Loggins so far. He seems to, the players seem to really like him. Obviously, the biggest question for him has always been about the play calling. So we're not, won't get an answer on that for a little while. But from a pure sort of personality, coaching, implementing the system standpoint, it seems like all of that's been going really well. Everybody seems pretty happy with it. So it's been good so far. I've gotten pretty good impressions from the early conversations we've had.
Yes, I mean, that's kind of been one of the things that stuck out to me. I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's kind of one of the biggest takeaways I got as a former coach and as a guy who was not always sold on the former guy. We don't mention his name on this podcast, but it seems like Dowell Loggins is the anti-former guy. Like when you hear players talk about having no fear on the practice field, playing free, streamlining, Spencer Rattler on the Bussin' with the Boys podcast mentioned one play that was like 15 words. Imagine having 100 plays on a wristband like that and trying to get 11 people all on the same page and 5 offensive linemen who really have to act like a fist, right? Like you have 5 guys that, maybe I need to do it with that hand. There we go. And so you have 5 fingers, right? If you try to punch somebody with your fingers, you're really not going to hurt them. You're going to hurt yourself. But when you act in unison as one, it can have a powerful effect. And I think it's going to be better for the offensive line. And it's certainly when guys can play free and not worry about just being dog cussed in front of everybody and thinking about, oh my God, I can't make this mistake, or what am I supposed to do? It is a completely different mindset for players who can play free, who can have fun, and who can play fast.
Yeah, and I mean, I think especially, with the O-line, it's a lot of those guys aren't necessarily experienced, but most of them are veteran. A lot of them, were kind of that second string group last year. And then it seems like the transfers they've brought in have clicked really well. I mean, everybody has good things to say about Nick Gargiulio from Yale. I expect him to be a pretty strong contender for that starting center spot. And yeah, I mean, it seems like even, with Lonnie Teasley, everybody's had good things to say about him kind of stepping into that O-line coach role. So it seems like things are trending the way you want them to during spring practice, where you really do want to, get so much of that implementation and those basics taken care of before you get into the real, season time.
No doubt. So one major position on offense where there's a lot of question marks because there aren't a lot of players is running back. And there's a new guy who's playing running back, and a guy that a lot of people thought when he came out of high school probably should have been a running back. And that is DeCarrion Joyner. And so from talking to him, his teammates, and coaches, to me, I think this is really something to monitor going forward. I do think South Carolina needs to add more from the transfer portal in the May period, but you just don't know. I mean, that's kind of like a box of chocolates. Like you just don't know what you're going to get right now.
Yeah.
But I think over the course of 11 more practices, I think they will know what they can get. And based off the early returns, I really think DeKirian Joyner could be the starting running back when South Carolina plays North Carolina in Charlotte.
Yeah, it really wouldn't surprise me at all, honestly. I mean, I think it makes sense for him. You know, it seems like a good fit. He's, you know, a bigger guy than Juju is, or even than Mario Anderson is. You know, they need somebody who has that size aspect of being a running back as opposed to just sort of the flat speed and the shiftiness that a guy like Juju really kind of leans on. And I mean, Shane has said it, good things happen when DK is on the field and the ball's in his hands. It doesn't matter where he is. It's usually ends up being a pretty good play. So I think, you know, if that's going to be a way for them to get him more touches, even, you know, as a receiving running back, I think is an interesting spot for him. You know, it's definitely not a bad move. And considering the depth they've got in that wide receiver room, they don't really need him there per se. You know, that with Juice, with Amari Brown, with Xavier Legette, with Eddie Lewis is a guy who we've heard a lot about from coaches and players during the first couple weeks of spring practice. You know, I think it's a good fit for what they need right now. So yeah, I mean, we'll see. We've got open practice tomorrow, so we'll see if we see him take any running back reps. But I think it's a really smart move by that coaching staff just to try it out and see.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think Dowell Loggins could do some interesting things there, because if you've got DeKirian Joyner and Spencer Rattler side by side in the shotgun formation, you don't know who necessarily is going to take the snap, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so I think that could make for some interesting offense. I do worry about his durability because he has had a history of injuries at times, but I mean, there's still a long way to go there, but I do think it's a very intriguing storyline for this offense, along with some other new players like Eddie Lewis, like Trey Knox, and the rest of the newbies at tight end, because they're all newbies, whether they're transfers or true freshmen. I mean, you do hear Trey Knox's name a lot. That's quite frankly not a surprise. Another guy, Joshua Simon. Just what do you make of this rebuilt tight end room?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting, I think, especially, you know, Josh and Trey are newbies, obviously, in the, you know, technical sense, but both of them are fifth-year guys. They've played a lot of football. Trey Knox has played a lot of football with Dowell Loggins specifically and in the SEC. So I think the transition really isn't as hard as it could have been, you know, especially with Trey, but also with Josh, just kind of having so many years of playing behind him. I mean, Trey, I don't know how many of y'all have seen him in person. He's enormous. And he's real quick for how big he is. So he's definitely one I think is going to be really exciting for them. And yeah, I mean, some of those younger guys, those true freshmen, I think it's hard. It's similar to like an O-line or D-line to me, where I think it's hard as a true freshman to fit in at a tight end role just because your body's not there yet. But, you know, Nick Elksnis obviously has been at Florida, you know, is used to the SEC a little bit more, but has dealt with some injury issues. So that's kind of the big question mark with him. But it's not a bad room considering what they lost. You know, you look at that group and it doesn't feel like a downgrade from what they were working with last year.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. So switching to defense, I thought Dave Cloninger maybe had the question that was most on my mind that nobody's really talked about, and that is for Clayton White improving the run defense. When South Carolina's defense is at its best, they're getting turnovers. They do that extremely well. But when they're not, because of I think because of personnel, because of limitations, particularly at linebacker, I think that's why they've struggled so much to stop the run. Mo Kaba, your best linebacker, was injured in game 2 last year. I thought Sherrod Green played really well. I think he and Mo Kaba, if they're playing together all of last year, I do think the run defense is a lot better. Brad Johnson's a guy that is from my neck of the woods, and my dad worked his entire career in Pendleton, South Carolina. I squared off against the Bulldogs. They were in our conference. But he was just a guy who could never really find a home at a position and never really seemed comfortable. Now Mokaba's out this spring, and it's essentially all new guys. Stone Blanton, certainly we saw him get taken advantage of in the bowl game. He's leaned up. He's gotten quicker. I'm all for seeing that. Jaron Willis, the Ole Miss transfer who played with Juju McDowell, is out there. And you have some other guys as well. But to me, it really is going to start at linebacker. To me, Clayton White's a guy that's on the hot seat this year, quite frankly. South Carolina beat Tennessee not because they could really stop them. They hung 63 on them.
Yeah.
Right, like Clemson, it was 31-30. And then the bowl game, I can't really blame him because of all the defections and the guys that transferred out. They just ran out of gas. But to me, something's got to change, particularly with the run defense going into this year.
Yeah, I do think a lot of that last year was partly a personnel problem, with losing Strawn and Kaba so early when those two had really settled in as the starters. Sherrod Green was still a little bit injured coming into last year, and obviously had, a ton of health problems throughout his career. So I think they've ended up in a tough spot. And I think one of the things that I've always liked about the way Clayton coaches is just that South Carolina's defense always seemed to get better after halftime. And I think a coach who can make adjustments is always a good sign. It's something Dawn Staley's very good at, when you look at that sort of thing. But I think where they're struggling right now is just with the development side of things, with getting guys in the building who are able to, actually execute things at the SEC level the way that they want to see them. And hopefully, this recruiting class does have a lot of defensive guys in it, not necessarily at linebacker, but a lot of, guys who came in as defensive linemen or as defensive backs that could kind of shift around there. So I think this definitely is going to be sort of a telling year if it looks the same as last year, or if it is, continuing to move forward. And I think that's sort of the biggest thing to look for.
So South Carolina has to replace several guys in the secondary as well. But honestly, I think if you're Shane Beamer, if you're Clayton White, you can have comfort in the fact that Torian Gray is in charge of that room. You do have Marcellus Dial and O'Donnell Soldier of Fortune coming back. Obviously, both made key plays down the stretch for South Carolina. Dial with a big interception against DJ Ukulele, formerly of Clemson, and then OD Fortune, a 100-plus yard interception return that, quite frankly, put the Gamecocks back in it and tied the game late in Jacksonville. To me, those are things that they can build on, but I also think there's a lot of talented younger guys behind them.
Yeah, even you look at Nicky Memori and DQ Smith played a ton of reps last season. Both of them were, true starters by the end of last year. And that's as true freshmen. They and neither of them as super highly touted recruits who, came in as a ready to play type of guy. So for them to do what they did in the situation they were in last year, I think, really only sets them up for more success this year. I can't imagine either of them are going to regress or anything. I think, it's only up from what we saw from them last year. And again, they were stepping into the shoes of, senior veteran guys who had really been staples in that secondary and really didn't miss a beat. So I think, the future in that room is not one that I'm concerned about.
Yeah, it's not ideal when a true freshman leads your team in tackles. The last guy to do it, though, was Sky Moore, and he did it every single year he played. So, and you don't necessarily like a safety to lead your team in tackles either, because that says that a lot of plays are going, past the second level. So we'll see. I think Pup Howard is a huge piece of that puzzle. And then just like at running back, nobody really jumps out at edge, right? Like, I think you have to hope Jordan Strawn comes back, and you have to hope by game 1, Desmond Umeozulu is ready to go, or you hit the jackpot in the transfer portal in May, just like you hope to do at running back at edge, because there's not a lot of numbers. Obviously, we don't know if Montague Rames will or will not be with the team. He's another true freshman that now I don't even think you can count on, simply because he's not getting the benefit of spring practice. He's not getting the benefit of being in the weight room now because of the suspension. So I think a lot of questions, but to me, a lot of depth in the middle of the front of that defense with Boogie Huntley, Tonka Hemingway, TJ Sanders, Nick Barrett, Xavier McLeod is a guy, DeAndre Martin, and, there are other guys as well. To me, that and the safeties are, to me, the strength of the defense right now as far as the knowns and the numbers for the defense.
Yeah, no, I think that's the correct assessment. I think that's definitely the areas that come back in with kind of a clear leader, some guys who earned, a lot of reps last year, who have some of that veteran experience, who can kind of help mold some of these, younger 4-star guys coming in. Edge, I think, is just going to be the big question mark, even with Terrell Dawkins is also coming back from injury with Strawn. Mokaba still coming back from injury. They're just not healthy. So it's hard right now to look at that and go, okay, these are the clear starters. This is where everything's going to fit together. So, I know Kaba and Strawn, and I believe Dawkins as well. I don't think any of them will be full go at any point in spring practice. So we're going to kind of have to wait and see, I think, until the summer for that grouping.
All right. So let's switch gears and talk women's basketball. And I did not have Stanford and Indiana being eliminated in the second round on my bingo card.
No, I don't think anyone did.
I'll have to say this. It seems like Stanford, their only 2 viable scoring options were Haley Jones and the flopper Cameron Brink. Obviously an Academy Award winning actress over the course of her career, the biggest faker, flopper that I've ever seen. But Ole Miss overwhelmed them with their quickness and athleticism and their defense and toughness, I thought.
Yeah, that upset was a lot less surprising to me than Indiana-Miami was. Because, Ole Miss was underseeded at an 8. I think that we all can agree on at this point. Ole Miss was better than an 8 most of the year. Ole Miss probably should have been ranked for most of the year. And so that loss, especially just from a matchups perspective, that was not the kind of team that Stanford wanted to run into, especially that in that early of a round. And they hit that problem where, Hannah Jump is sometimes amazing, goes, 3 of 4 at the 3-point line. And then sometimes she doesn't. And when she doesn't, it really is all on Haley and on Cam. And I thought Ole Miss did a phenomenal job of kind of keeping Haley under control, especially. Cam still kind of had her way, that triple block was, I remember watching that and going, Ole Miss, I don't know if they have this, but they just really, Coach Yo game planned the hell out of that. And it worked. They just stuck to it. They did the same thing they did against South Carolina, really. They had a game plan. They came in and they ran it from buzzer to buzzer. And, with Stanford, they had that last little bump to close it out that they couldn't against South Carolina when they ended up in overtime.
Yeah, I think it's time to say that I was wrong, that maybe the SEC was not down. 4 teams in the Sweet 16, obviously South Carolina, Ole Miss, LSU, and Tennessee. Conceivably, you could have an all SEC Final Four because it is one team in each regional. I'm not expecting that.
No, but
quite frankly,
it's far from impossible. I think it's a lot less likely, or it's a lot more likely that it realistically should be.
I agree. I completely agree. I think Ole Miss will have their hands full with Louisville, who just, you and I both were just not high on the Big 12 as a league, and they did not impress. Louisville boat raced Texas, and honestly thought UCLA just got bored against Oklahoma because they were up so much, and then Oklahoma got back in it, and then UCLA had to say, all right, wake up, let's go ahead and dispose of these guys. But Indiana, let's stay on the Stanford bracket, because now Iowa looks like they could be on a collision course with South Carolina. This, I think, would be the dream matchup in Dallas for ESPN, for the committee, for the Naismith voters, even though the award will already be announced, which I don't think it should be until after the Final Four. But Iowa, Colorado took down Duke. Really was not expecting that. I just thought Duke just ran out of gas. And then Louisville, who I didn't really think was that good.
No, I didn't either.
They're peaking, I think, at the right time. Haley Van Lith, obviously a go-to player, but they have others as well. And so, and then in South Carolina's bracket, it's chalk. It is the top 4 seeds. That rematch with UCLA is on deck for Saturday at 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 Central, when I will be calling high school baseball, unfortunately. And then you've got Notre Dame and Maryland. And Notre Dame, to me, even without Olivia Miles, who I thought was the straw that stirred the drink, they have been impressive in the win over, Southern Utah, and then dispensing of Mississippi State, another SEC team.
Yeah.
But they're really going to be tested because Diamond Miller looks like a player on a mission right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Diamond is one of those who has just, every game it feels like she gets better. She's just so fun to watch right now. And that's why, if I'm South Carolina, I would much rather Notre Dame win that game because, I think it's a really tough position for them having played Maryland without Diamond Miller, because you essentially have to throw that game plan out. That is a fundamentally different game than the one that they would play with Diamond on the court. So I think that is going to be a an interesting matchup if we get to that point, obviously, between Notre Dame and Maryland, which I think will probably be a great game. I mean, Notre Dame, has really exceeded the expectations for me without Olivia. I thought Mississippi State had a chance to knock them off in that game. But unfortunately, I feel like they just sort of ran out of gas there at the end. But I mean, what a season for them to even make it to that stage. And yeah, I mean, UCLA, I said, I mean, that matchup I think is one of the toughest on the bracket left for them. I mean, you look at Iowa in the Final Four, no part of that concerns me for South Carolina. Even Maryland, I think they will put up a much better fight than they did the first time, but I don't see them, being just kind of in that same league with South Carolina right now. UCLA is just such an interesting matchup because they play so fast. And I think you saw that with Oklahoma. I mean, they were just running the floor. And the biggest problem with that is that they run out of gas too. They get tired, and that's what you saw in that third quarter of that game. But if they can keep that pace going, I mean, that pace is what puts South Carolina behind when they played them the first time. They're the only team the entire year to give South Carolina a single-digit game at home. The only one. They're up at halftime at Colonial Life Arena. That is not something that many teams in the last 3 years can say they've done. And obviously South Carolina is in a very different place than it was in November. So is UCLA, who's, starting Kiki Rice as a true freshman. I would posit, she's making bigger jumps than a lot of seniors are as a true freshman over, 3 months playing in the Pac-12. So that game I'm really, really excited for. I think it's going to be a very good game. I think at least for a half, it will be a very close game. And then after halftime is where we'll sort of see what happens.
All right, so I'm going to agree with the studio folks at ESPN who said, when you play South Carolina the second time, it's generally worse than the first time. And I think South Carolina is a completely different team. I think, Raven Johnson, I think, played 3 minutes maybe in the first game. I think at that point, both she and Key were on minutes restriction. And so you had a lot of Zia Cook at point guard. I don't think we saw the complete depth of South Carolina at that point in the season. And so I still think South Carolina is the only team that can beat South Carolina. And when you look at the first 2 rounds, there's a lot to like, but there's also some things to be concerned about, like going 12 for 28 on layups. And going and missing 15 free throws in the first round game. I mean, these are the things that, I mean, quite frankly, if Georgia made layups, they would have beaten Iowa, who really does not concern me, because I think just like Indiana, they do not have the athleticism to keep up. I think probably Maryland is the most athletic team left in South Carolina's bracket. I do like UCLA. UCLA, though, can space you and can hurt you from 3, and they can also put it on the deck. And so South Carolina's defense is going to be critical, but then again, South Carolina is the number 1 defensive team in the country in points allowed, 50.6, and opponent's field goal percentage at 31.2%. And I don't think either team South Carolina played even shot 30% in the first 2 rounds. And so I thought, Emily, that South Florida game, after the first quarter and South Carolina figured out how to play the staggers, I thought that was maybe as dominant a defensive performance as we've seen from them.
Yeah, and I mean, that's why Iowa is so sort of uninteresting to me as a matchup, just because, I mean, Iowa's defense, I think, ranks outside of the top 300. Like one of the only Power 5 defenses that ranks worse is Oklahoma. So I mean, for a team that is that weak defensively against, a team like South, because Iowa, what they really rely on so much of the time is just being able to score more than their opponent. They average 3 points more a game than South Carolina does, with one of the worst defenses in the country. So, I mean, that matchup, I don't even see it being competitive almost. I mean, unless, Caitlin Clark goes into God mode and puts up 50, which she's certainly capable of doing. But again, against, the number one defense in the country, that's not such an easy feat. Yeah, I mean, I think with UCLA, just the thing that's so interesting to me about them is that speed, because South Carolina, for, as much size as it has, it's not fast in the way that UCLA is fast. I mean, Charisma Osborne is a shifty player to try to guard. I mean, she looked really, really good in that Oklahoma game. She's looked like that all season. She had 25, I think, last time they played South Carolina. And yeah, I mean, I think that's how they sort of took Raven out of the game, was that Raven plays that real fast, sort of chaotic passing style. And UCLA moved so quickly that they were outpacing her on that. They could kind of make that ineffective. And that's why I think, Kiera came in and put up a double-double and had such an incredible game against them, because she is that more sort of methodical, steady, can pull up and hit that mid-range shot type of player. So I think that's one of the most interesting things for me in this matchup, again, is where we see that Kiera Raven balance fall, and whether UCLA can kind of keep that going the way that they did last time.
I'm so happy for Kara Fletcher, because she looks like the player now that she was 2 years ago, which was the last time she played. Like, the game has slowed down. She's comfortable now with her teammates, with her new team, with her role. And I think that just means trouble for every other point guard in the tournament. So let's look at the other side of the bracket. I mean, Virginia Tech is the 1 seed, but UConn, as long as they have everybody that's playing right now, to me, I mean, they are the betting number 2 choice to make the Final Four behind South Carolina. Yeah. South Carolina, the overwhelming favorite still. But UConn, I don't know. I mean, Elizabeth Kitley, I think it's going to be very interesting if that is the matchup, because that's what's really given UConn problems, is teams that play defense and have a legitimate post player that doesn't have to have their back turned to the basket on the block. And Elizabeth Kitley is similar to Aaliyah Boston in that she can face up, whether it's in the corner, at the elbow, in the circle, and she can play off the dribble and she can shoot.
Yeah, I mean, I am not counting Tennessee out of that Virginia Tech game. I think that is a very, very dangerous game for Virginia Tech. I mean, I know Tennessee just played Toledo, which is not,
Holy Toledo.
Is no Virginia Tech, but I mean, they looked really incredible in that game, just clicking. I mean, Rakia Jackson, Jordan Horston did not have great games, and they just dominated. I mean, Tennessee just never looked back in that game. And they've played Virginia Tech already. They saw them, back in, I think, November, when they were really kind of going through it early in the year. And I believe they only lost that game by 3. This current Tennessee team is much, much better than the Tennessee team that played Virginia Tech in November. And, again, obviously everybody's in a different place now than they were then. But for that game to be that close when Tennessee was doing that poorly overall early in the year, that does not bode well to me for Kenny Brooks and his group. I mean, I think so much stock has been put in that ACC tournament run that they made, but it's an ACC tournament where Olivia Miles was freshly out, and, Duke and North Carolina taking each other out in the early rounds. And so, it just, they did not have as difficult of a path through that tournament as they probably should have. And so I think Tennessee is going to give them a fight at the very least. And I would not at all be surprised to see the Lady Vols come out of that for the UConn rematch, which, talking of games that ESPN would love to have,
oh yeah,
I cannot imagine they're not cheering that one on.
Will they play the Geno rant after the first half? That's the thing. Tennessee is hot right now. They are peaking. They have 2 stars, and their supporting cast is also stepping up, defending, rebounding, knocking down open looks. I agree with you. That to me, that is maybe the second most intriguing game of the Sweet 16. When you go to the Greenville 2 regional, because Virginia Tech, Tennessee, Ohio State, UConn, Ole Miss, Louisville, they're all flying to Seattle. All those Eastern teams flying to the West Coast, and then you've got UCLA coming from Los Angeles to Greenville. And in football and basketball, when teams from the West fly east and they have early games, they tend to struggle sometimes. So we'll see. But LSU and Utah, to me, the winner of this game is probably headed to the Final Four.
Yeah.
And that would put Kim Mulkey and Dawn Staley on the opposite side of the bracket in Dallas.
Yeah, it would certainly be. Again, rematches that ESPN would love to see. Tennessee LSU was a pretty good game last time they saw each other.
That's right.
I don't think
both games, right? Overtime, LSU won, and then Tennessee puts them out in the SEC tournament after being down 24-10.
Yeah. There is no love lost between those 2 teams. That would be a hot game if they meet in the Final Four. But I think too, not to count Villanova out, but I think Villanova, if it runs into LSU or Utah, will probably have run its course. An incredible season for them, an incredible season for Maddie Siegrist, but I think Maddie can only take them so far, unfortunately, and up against an Angel Reese or an Alyssa Peely. I don't love their chances. I will say I have Utah in my Final Four. I've had them in my Final Four. But it would not surprise me at all to see LSU knock them off the way they're playing right now. Angel has just looked incredible through their first couple of games. She dominated against Michigan. And I think that's where you want to be at this stage right now. This is the time to keep putting up those numbers. And I think three out of 4 SEC teams in the Final Four is not impossible at all. I would posit to say it's 60-40 maybe. I think the tougher matchup there is Tennessee getting through UConn, which they really had a hard time with last time. But again, I don't know that would be impossible either, just with kind of the weird roller coaster UConn's been on lately. Because Baylor gave them a game for about 3 quarters, and it kind of fell apart there at the end.
Yeah, Alabama jumped all over Baylor, and I just turned that game because I thought it was going to be a blowout. And then the next day, what? Baylor? Whoa, let me look this up. So if there's one spoiler in the Sweet 16 that you can see spoiling it and making it to the Final Four, who would it be?
Yeah, I'm tempted to say Colorado right now, just because of how hot they've been. If they can get through Iowa, I like their chances against either Ole Miss or Louisville. I think they've really been a team that's hit their stride at the right time. So many people picked MTSU to come out of that first round game, and Colorado put that to bed quickly. And then Duke, has been the second or third best defensive team in the country pretty much all year. They get over 60 on them, which is not something a ton of teams have done. You saw that UNC game where it was like 45-42 or whatever was the final. Colorado has had a really tough path through the bracket. And I think now they're at the point, with Stanford out of the way, where if they get through Iowa, I think that's a very legitimate Final Four team.
I could see it. So my Final Four, as things stand today, because I did have Indiana going.
I had Stanford, so we're 1 for 1 there.
Yeah, so I'm of the mindset and the belief that South Carolina is on a mission. I think they're the only team that can beat South Carolina is if they go like 9 for 27 on layups and 8 for 21 from the free throw line, and Beal and Boston get in foul trouble. That could be problematic. But I've got South Carolina. I'm going with Iowa, LSU, and UConn. UConn is game to game because you don't know who's going. One player goes down for them. It's a really big deal.
Yeah.
That's why I didn't pick them to begin with, because
that's what's tough. Yeah. But AZ Fudd, really, she was back against Baylor. That was AZ Fudd took over that game. And I think I feel the same way with Paige. It's so easy to forget how good the two of them are just because we haven't seen them in so long. We've seen so little of them over the last 2 years. And so when, they're finally out there and they're, they look healthy again, it's almost like seeing it for the first time again, where you're like, oh yeah, this is the real deal. So with a hot AZ, I like UConn against pretty much anyone except for South Carolina. I think, Iowa right now is probably the favorite in Seattle 4, but I don't really like anybody who's left there. So, I think any of them could beat each other. And then that top bracket, I think, I had Utah in my Final Four in my bracket picks originally. But I think either LSU or Utah is a pretty solid lock for that spot. South Carolina to lose, things would have to go horribly wrong. And that's kind of what I've been saying. I think things would have to go horribly wrong. They're going to have to make mistakes, and it's going to have to be an opponent that is able to capitalize on those. And that's why I think UCLA is maybe the toughest matchup left in the bracket for them, because UCLA has shown in the past that they're able to do that, and they did that with teams in the Pac-12 this year. But if South Carolina plays even a solid game against anyone that's left, I'm not concerned for them.
So I think ESPN may get all the dream matchups. Like they could get the rematch of Tennessee and UConn. Then who wouldn't like Gino Auriemma and Kim Mulkey on the sidelines, right in Dallas? The former Baylor coach going back to Dallas. I can only imagine the outfit that she would wear for that one.
I've been saying her Dallas. I don't know what she has left in the closet at this rate.
Oh, trust me, there's definitely.
We've had some good ones the last couple of days.
As long as she doesn't break out the Cruella de Vil, I think we'll be okay. And then if you get Iowa, South Carolina, on the other side. I mean, to me, the most interesting matchup would be watching Gino and Kim Mulkey both just going nuts on the sidelines. You could have 2 water bottles thrown in that game. And then the whole build-up, all you would see is probably Aaliyah Boston crying still and Caitlin Clark standing up, flexing for the shot she hit against Indiana, which now really, quite frankly, doesn't mean jack shit in the grand scheme of things. I hate to put it that way, but it wasn't a shot that won the national championship. It was basically a shot against a team that couldn't get out of the second round at home.
I mean, it's so like, I think that's almost the thing that's been frustrating with Iowa is that Iowa is so fun to watch. I mean, they are the most fun team to watch in women's basketball right now. I don't think there's an argument about that, but they're just not the best basketball team. And I don't think there's an argument about that either. You know, it's you cannot have a bottom 50 defense and win a national championship. You just can't. I mean, and I'm a very defensive minded person. I've always valued that. It's why I am the #1 cheerleader for Bree Beal in the country. But I just don't see it for them. I don't see a way that Iowa gets through an Ole Miss or a Louisville even. You know, they're not, you can't outscore everyone to the championship. I don't see a path where that's possible. And if they run into South Carolina in the Final Four, I think it's going to be a rude awakening for, frankly, a lot of people.
I agree. That's why I can't bet against South Carolina. Look, I'm a homer. I'm a grad. You can look behind me and you can see the first national championship team. You can see Dawn Staley and me with the net lace from 2017 at the team hotel. Judy Gaston, by the way, took that picture. But here's the deal. South Carolina's toughness, the rebounding, the size, the versatility, the depth, and the fact that they rebound 50% of their misses, it doesn't matter. And when Gino Auriemma says, well, we got to make at least 10 threes to beat South Carolina. Well, when you only can attempt 6, you're not making 10.
Yeah.
And so that's why the game plan, to me, this team is the total package because they score over 80 points a game. They hold you to 50 or less. They hold you to 31% or less. They shoot 47%. And that's an amazing statistic when you consider how many layups they miss.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing is South Carolina wins its bad games. And that's something I've said a lot this year is, I mean, they've had games where they've played really poorly. I mean,
at Stanford.
And at Mississippi State, really. I mean, that was one of their worst showings of the year. And Mississippi State hung in that game, gave them, I think, a 7-point game on the road. And, you know, but
at Georgia,
they don't lose. That's the thing is they don't lose those games, even when, you know, nothing is working the way that they want it to. And yeah, I mean, that gets harder the deeper you get into the bracket, obviously. But this is also a team that does really well under pressure, you know, went into a very hostile environment at UConn and won there for the first time ever this year. And again, if I'm South Carolina, do I want to see UConn again? Not really. But, you know, am I picking UConn to beat them in any scenario right now? No. You know, even if Paige came back tomorrow, I think I'm still picking South Carolina to win that rematch. I mean, it's just, if it's South Carolina or the field, I'm taking South Carolina right now, you know, just based on the state of them and also the state of everything else I've seen.
Defense, rebounding, toughness, but also talent. Aaliyah Boston, Zia Cook, the freshies. What was it like when Olivia Thompson hits the 3? I mean, it had to be an incredible moment at the end of that game.
Yeah, it was really cool. It was, I mean, she got in with a little over 2 minutes left, which, obviously was very intentional. I think it was, that class's goodbye to colonial life, and everybody knew it. And I mean, to see, first of all, for Chloe Kitts to assist her on that 3 was cool. They have gotten really close. Chloe has, I think, sees Olivia very much as sort of a big sister figure to her. And so that was cool for her to get the assist. And then, I mean, the arena roared when that shot fell. It was cool for Olivia. It was cool for the bench just to see them absolutely lose it. It was cool to hear Dawn, laugh talking about it afterwards. It was the perfect way for them to have their sort of farewell to colonial life. And, obviously Greenville's not too far from home, but that was a pretty special moment, I think, for all of them.
All right. So when are you heading up to Greenville, and what type of environment are you anticipating?
Yeah, I mean, based on the way the SEC tournament went, I am expecting it to be pretty close to a South Carolina home game anytime they're playing. But we'll have LSU up in Greenville too. I'll be helping out with some of their coverage for my pal Corey Diaz, who works for the Gannett paper down in Louisiana.
Yeah,
who
I'll be was with the Greenville News.
Yes,
on the beat last
former
year.
South Carolina beat writer. Yeah. Yes. So I'll be up there with him on Friday, helping out with some LSU stuff as well. But they traveled really well for the SEC tournament, so I would expect to see that again. There was a lot of purple around town. But yeah, it'll be interesting just to see how they handle, I mean, just the number of teams that are going to be there, because, the SEC tournament was a pretty hectic weekend up there. So I'm curious to see how they're gonna manage all of this. But I think it'll be really cool. I mean, it was a really cool environment, even just for the SEC tournament, to see, there were Tennessee fans at, Arkansas, Ole Miss, and games like that. There were South Carolina fans at every game. There were LSU fans at every game, just people watching basketball. And that was one of my favorite parts of being at that tournament, was just seeing people who had no rooting interest just hanging out at the games and watching. And I'm sure we'll see more of that, especially with, the stakes right now of this stage in the tournament. So yeah, it should be a good time. I'll be up there, like I said, starting Friday. We'll have media on Friday, and then obviously games that night, and then we'll play Saturday. Sunday we'll get the Elite Eight game from the other side of the Greenville bracket, and then Monday obviously we'll close things out, and hopefully we'll be on a flight to Dallas Wednesday evening. So that's my kind of 7-day outlook.
Well, I'm waiting on Dallas, and it's about a 3-hour ride straight up I-35. So
that's not too bad.
Yeah. So it's going to be an interesting Sweet 16. I mean,
there's really not a bad matchup in it.
Yeah.
there's not a bad game.
I agree. And I think there will continue to be some upsets. So we'll see. But I'm with you. And obviously this is a Gamecock podcast, but I think Dawn Staley will be 2 for 2, cutting down the nets in Dallas. And here's the sad thing, Emily, is if they don't do it, the season is considered a failure.
Yeah. And
I mean, and a disappointment.
Yeah. And it's, you don't want it to be that, obviously. I mean, it's, at the end of the day, it's the first regular season undefeated in program history still. It's, the longest win streaks in program history. It's the longest home win streak in program history. It's, I mean, just the records and everything that have fallen. And it's, you don't want that to be erased if, they lose, because teams lose in March Madness. I mean, look at Purdue. I mean, it's never impossible. Again, if you're telling me pick South Carolina or the field, I'm picking South Carolina every time right now. But I mean, it's hard, and I'm sure it's hard for them, just because of what they've accomplished. If they don't add that one more one more win on top of everything else, it's hard that will sort of fall by the wayside.
All right. So last question. And I was there in 2017 when Morgan William itty bitty hit the shot heard round the world and broke the longest win streak in the country at like 112 or 116 games. I mean, it was ridiculous. South Carolina, 4 wins away from a season of perfection. That would put them in rarefied air as only one of 3 or 4 teams, I believe, to repeat with a perfect season. How does that add to the legacy of the Freshies and Dawn Staley?
Yeah, I mean, it's something, I think it's easy just because of how easy it's looked for them so many times this year and even so many times last year. I think it's easy to forget how difficult it is, what they've done, and how like deeply, deeply unusual it is. I mean, to even be in the position to win repeat championships. I think UConn is the only one to do it since, Pat Summitt did it back in the early 2000s in 07, 08. So, I mean, in the last decade, it's been one. It's just been Gino. And before that, before Gino and Pat, who are, arguably the 2 most iconic coaches in the history of the sport, there's one other. It was Southern California in 82 and 83.
Cheryl Miller.
84. Yeah. And that's, I mean, that is an unreal level of company to be in, at the stage in your career where Dawn Staley is. It's that ascends you immediately to legend status, because the only coaches who have done it are the legends of the sport. And I mean, even when you look at undefeated seasons, it's very much the same. There's only been, I believe, 5 programs that have done it, 10 or 9 teams. UConn's got 6 of them.
Yeah.
But it's Kim Mulkey, who, like her or not, is a legend of the sport. It's Gino, it's Pat, and it's Texas back again. Another one, I think, from well back in like the 80s or 90s.
Louisiana Tech as well.
Yes, that's right. And which again, a Kim Mulkey team.
Kim Mulkey.
So I mean, it's such an unusual accomplishment, and it's not supposed to look this easy. I think too, we've been sort of desensitized to it because UConn did it so much back in that 20 teens era, where it was just, I mean, the Brianna Stewart years, it was just year after year after year. That's not normal. Like, that's not a thing that happens. And so I think, for this team, again, to have 2 losses last year, turn around and have none this year is, I mean, just, it's remarkable. It really is, whether they win a national championship or not. I mean, that is an accomplishment that very few people in college basketball can say they've ever even come close to.
Emily Adams with the last word. Emily, safe travels to Greenville. Best of luck. Hopefully you'll be there until Tuesday morning.
Yeah.
unless you're driving back late Monday night, which is not the most fun drive, because I've done it growing up in the upstate of South Carolina. But enjoy the atmosphere, the tournament. It should be fantastic. And hopefully next week we can preview the Final Four before you head to Dallas.
Yeah, absolutely. And hopefully we'll see you in Texas in a
Absolutely.
week.
You bet. All right. Thanks for being with us today, and thanks for all that you do. And hopefully we will preview the Final Four next week.
Sounds good. Thanks, Keith. Always a pleasure.
All right. All right. That was Emily Adams from the Greenville News. Always interesting, intriguing, and great stuff. And no, Mindy, I did not realize you were from Lamar, but shout out to all my Lamar peeps on the podcast as we sign off. Tomorrow will be a big football centered show on Friday. Mike Yuva will join the podcast. No Garnet and Black Town Hall tonight, but we'll be back next week. I'll definitely miss all my guys and gals tonight, but hopefully there'll be a lot more to talk about next Wednesday. A couple of welcome homes pending out there, and so we'll wait and see for that. So until next week for Gamecock Pod Live, and until tomorrow for Gamecock Pod Daily, this has been episode 1183. Thanks to Jamie Bradford, who absolutely killed it, and Emily Adams, who is just so good at her job and is a treat every time we have her on the show. Thank you. And I'll see all my patrons tomorrow. And for everybody else, I'll see you next week on Gamecock Pod Live. Keith Allsep signing off. I am out of here.